The starship Starweaver drifted silently through the darkness of deep space, its hull gleaming under the distant starlight. Captain Maya Rodriguez stood at the bridge's observation window, watching the unfamiliar constellation patterns with experienced eyes. After 15 years of deep space exploration, she thought she'd seen everything the universe had to offer. She was about to discover how wrong she was. "Captain, we're picking up something unusual," Lieutenant Kai Chen called from his sensor station. His fingers danced across the holographic display, bringing up detailed readings. Well, you should see this for yourself." Rodriguez turned away from the window, raising an eyebrow at her sensor officer's uncharacteristically uncertain tone. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying what appeared to be a massive space station. But unlike any human construction, this one was arranged in perfect geometric patterns, each section precisely measured and aligned with mathematical precision that bordered on obsession. "Are those filing cabinets?" First Officer David Park asked, squinting at the external features of the station. "In space, they appear to be storage units of some kind," Chen confirmed, still studying his readings. "The entire structure is organized like some kind of cosmic office building." Before Rodriguez could respond, the ship's AI, chimed in with its characteristically dry humor. "Captain, we're being hailed. The transmission appears to be formatted as a standardized form letter, complete with triplicate copies and a request for your digital signature." Rodriguez exchanged amused glances with her bridge crew. First contact with an advanced alien civilization, and they were leading with paperwork. "Put it through, AI. Let's see what kind of bureaucrats we're dealing with." The view screen shifted to display what could only be described as the galaxy's most formally dressed alien. The being had silvery blue skin and 4 arms, each holding what appeared to be different types of data tablets. Its uniform was pressed so perfectly that it seemed to defy the laws of physics, and a name badge with at least 15 lines of text was prominently displayed on its chest. "Greetings, unscheduled visitors," the alien began, its voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who spent their life enforcing regulations. "I am Senior Administrative Coordinator X427B of the Galactic Empire's Department of Unexpected Encounters. Subsection 7, Paragraph 3, Amendment 12. You have entered regulated space without filling out Forms X11A through X11C. This is most irregular." Rodriguez managed to keep a straight face, though she heard a poorly suppressed snort from somewhere behind her. "I apologize for our oversight," she replied diplomatically. "We're from Earth, and this is our first encounter with your civilization. I'm Captain Maya Rodriguez of the exploration vessel Starweaver." X427B's eyes widened slightly. "Unregistered species conducting unauthorized exploration. This will require additional documentation." The alien shuffled through its tablets frantically. "Please stand by while I locate the proper first contact forms. They should be filed under U for unexpected, or possibly I for irregular, or perhaps D for deeply concerning development." "We'd be happy to assist with your documentation," Rodriguez offered, fighting to maintain her professional demeanor. "Perhaps we could start with a simple exchange of cultural information." The alien froze mid-shuffle. "Exchange information without proper protocols, without the required forms in quintuplicate, without establishing a proper chain of documentation." Its voice rose with each question. "Captain Rodriguez, surely you realize the galaxy runs on proper filing procedures." "Actually," Park chimed in, "Earth mostly runs on coffee and improvisation. Speaking of which, would you like some? Coffee, I mean. We found it helps make paperwork more bearable." The look of horror on X427B's face was priceless. "You consume stimulants while processing official documents. How do you maintain consistent letter spacing? What about proper margin alignment?" "We usually just let our eyes handle the formatting," Rodriguez explained, gesturing toward one of ARIA's holographic interface points. "It leaves us free to focus on the actual work." A's? handling official formatting. Zex 427b seemed to be having trouble processing this information. But what about the sacred traditions of manual indentation? As if to demonstrate the cultural divide, AI chose that moment to helpfully display a holographic representation of Earth's current digital filing system. Zex 427b's eyes tracked the casual way documents flew between folders, the seemingly chaotic but highly efficient organization, and the complete lack of physical storage units. "This is impossible," the alien declared. "Your species cannot possibly maintain a functioning civilization with such informality. Would you like to see our mission reports?" Rodriguez offered innocently. "Show them our standard exploration log format." The AI complied, displaying a document that, while containing all necessary information, was formatted with what the Vexaxians would probably consider criminal casualness. Zex 427b made a sound that might have been a gasp of horror or possibly a bureaucratic hiccup. "Captain," the alien said finally, its voice strained, "I believe I will need to escalate this to the Department of Unprecedented Situations. Please remain in your current position while I locate the appropriate escalation request forms. And perhaps I will try some of this coffee while we wait. For research purposes only, of course." As the transmission ended, Rodriguez turned to her crew with a grin. "Well, people, it looks like humanity's first official contact with an advanced alien civilization is going to involve teaching them how to relax. Prepare our finest coffee service. Something tells me we're about to introduce the concept of casual Fridays to the galaxy." The conference room aboard the Vexaxian administrative station, perfectly aligned procedures, lived up to its name in every conceivable way. Each chair was positioned exactly 47.3 centimeters from the table edge. The holographic displays were calibrated to project at precisely 90-degree angles. Even the air seemed to circulate in mathematically perfect patterns. Captain Rodriguez sat at one end of the absurdly long table, trying not to disturb the meticulously arranged stack of documents in front of her. Across from her, Senior Administrative Coordinator Zex 427b was engaged in what appeared to be an existential crisis, triggered by First Officer Park's casual suggestion to just wing it during their preliminary diplomatic discussions. But how can one wing an official diplomatic procedure? Zex sputtered, all four hands clutching different regulatory manuals. "There are protocols, procedures, properly formatted guidelines. Sometimes the best protocols are the ones we make along the way," Rodriguez offered, taking a sip from her coffee mug, which had caused another minor meltdown when she'd set it directly on the table without using the prescribed beverage placement mat. The situation wasn't helped by the fact that ARIA had taken it upon herself to help by automatically organizing and digitizing the Vexaxians' physical documents. The AI's efficient algorithms had reduced 3 centuries of carefully maintained paperwork into a searchable database in under 5 minutes, causing at least 2 junior administrators to faint. "Captain," Zex said, trying to maintain composure, "you must understand. The Vexaxian Empire has maintained perfect order through perfect documentation for over 15,000 years. Every interaction, every decision, every movement has been properly recorded, filed, and cross-referenced." "That sounds exhausting," Lieutenant Chen commented from his position near the door, where he was supposedly monitoring communications, but actually playing a game on his tablet. "Exhausting." A new voice entered the conversation as High Administrator Vox 001, as swept into the room, their ceremonial robes somehow even more pristinely pressed than Zex's uniform. "Try exhilarating. The pure joy of a properly indexed archive, the thrill of a perfectly aligned margin, the ecstasy of standardized font spacing." Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Park, who was doing an admirable job of keeping a straight face. "High Administrator," she began diplomatically, "while we admire your commitment to organization, perhaps we could focus on establishing basic diplomatic relations. Our species has much to offer each other. Oh, yes, Vox brightened. We have prepared the standard diplomatic relationship initialization forms. They're quite straightforward, only 753 pages, with appendices. Or, Park suggested, we could just shake hands and agree to be friends. The silence that followed was so profound that Rodriguez could have sworn she heard someone's perfectly starched collar crinkle in horror. "Captain," Vox said finally, their voice strained, "your species' cavalier attitude toward proper procedure is disturbing. How do you maintain order? How do you track progress? How do you—" They paused dramatically, "maintain proper documentation?" "Well," Rodriguez replied, nodding to Araya's interface, "we find that being adaptable often leads to better solutions than rigid adherence to procedure. For example, Araya showed them Project Gamma's success rate before and after we switched to flexible planning. The AI projected a series of graphs that showed marked improvement in efficiency and outcomes after adopting a more adaptable approach. The Vexaxians studied the data with a mixture of horror and fascination. But this implies—" Zex began, then stopped, as if afraid to complete the thought, "that sometimes the best solution isn't the one in the manual." Park supplied helpfully. "Exactly. Like right now, instead of going through 700 pages of forms, we could be sharing knowledge, technology, and culture. Did you know humans have something called improvisational jazz?" The look of confusion on the Vexaxians' faces suggested they very much did not know about improvisational jazz, nor were they sure they wanted to. "Perhaps," Vox said slowly, examining the efficiency graphs again, "there might be some merit in exploring alternative methodologies. In a strictly controlled, properly documented manner, of course." "Of course," Rodriguez agreed, trying not to smile too broadly. "Araya, why don't you show them some examples of successful human-AI collaboration projects, the ones where we had to think outside the box?" As ARIA began displaying various human achievements, many of which had been accomplished through what the Vexaxians would probably consider alarmingly informal methods, Rodriguez noticed something interesting. Behind their expressions of bureaucratic horror, several of the younger administrators were watching with unmistakable fascination. "High Administrator," she said carefully, "what would you say to a cultural exchange program? A chance for our species to learn from each other's methods." Vox considered this, all while meticulously straightening an already perfectly straight stack of papers. Such a program would require extensive documentation, multiple levels of approval, and at least 17 different types of permits. "Or," Park interjected, "we could start small. Maybe invite some of your people to observe our operations while we learn about your organizational systems. No forms required, just pure learning and adaptation." The wave of gasps that swept through the Vexaxian side of the room suggested this might have been a step too far. But then something unexpected happened. "High Administrator," one of the younger Vexaxians spoke up, "Regulation 7249B, subsection 12, does allow for unofficial observation periods during first contact scenarios. It was filed under emergency exceptions in the year 15,429. Vox and Zex exchanged looks of surprise, clearly impressed by this deep knowledge of obscure regulations. "Well," Vox said finally, "I suppose, in the interest of thorough documentation, we should observe these human methods firsthand. For research purposes only, of course." "Of course," Rodriguez agreed, raising her coffee mug in a toast. "To cultural exchange and new ways of thinking." The Vexaxians hesitated, then carefully raised their own regulation-approved beverage containers. "To properly documented cultural exchange," Vox amended, "and potentially acceptable alternative methodologies." As the meeting continued, Rodriguez couldn't help but notice that several of the younger administrators had begun taking notes on tablets rather than in their traditional bound volumes. Small steps, perhaps, but steps nonetheless. The galaxy might not be ready for full human chaos yet, but at least they'd managed to introduce the concept of flexibility to the galaxy's most inflexible bureaucracy. No one could have predicted that the downfall of perfect Vexaxian order would begin with a simple cup of coffee. In retrospect, Captain Rodriguez probably should have realized that introducing a productivity-enhancing stimulant to a species already obsessed with efficiency might have some interesting side effects. It started innocently enough. During one of their cultural exchange sessions, Lieutenant Chen had set up a coffee station in the corner of the Vexaxian central filing room. The first few days, the aliens had regarded the dark liquid with suspicious looks and muttered comments about unauthorized beverages and non-regulation refreshments. Then Junior Administrator Keck 789C tried it. I was just conducting an analysis of human consumption habits, they later claimed in their incident report. It was purely for research purposes. Within hours, word had spread through the station's perfectly ordered corridors about the mysterious human drink that made documentation 47% more efficient. By the end of the day, the filing room had a line of administrators secretly trying to calculate how they could classify coffee breaks as essential procedural optimization periods. Rodriguez stood with Park in the observation deck, watching the chaos unfold below. The once pristine filing room now had scattered datapads, multiple empty coffee cups, and, most shockingly, administrators speaking to each other without first filing conversational intent forms. "Should we be worried?" Park asked, gesturing to where a group of young Vexaxians were huddled around Aria's interface, enthusiastically discussing something called workflow optimization algorithms. Aria. Rodriguez called, "What exactly are they working on down there?" The AI's holographic interface sparkled with what might have been amusement. "They appear to be developing a new hybrid filing system, Captain. It combines Vexaxian thoroughness with human flexibility. Also, they've discovered espresso." As if on cue, High Administrator Vox burst into the observation deck, their usually immaculate robes slightly askew. "Captain Rodriguez, you must explain this immediately." They thrust forward a datapad displaying productivity graphs. "How is it possible that allowing unofficial break periods and informal discussions has resulted in a 312% increase in processing efficiency?" "Well," Rodriguez began, but Vox wasn't finished. "And these brainstorming sessions, completely unstructured meetings where people just share ideas without proper documentation. It's chaos. Beautiful, efficient chaos." Fox's eyes had a slightly manic gleam that suggested they might have discovered the espresso as well. "You see," Park explained gently, "sometimes the best ideas come when people are relaxed and able to think freely. Coffee just helps create that environment." "But that's not the worst part," Vox continued, pulling out another datapad. "Look at these statistical analyses. The departments that have adopted these human casual protocols are showing unprecedented levels of innovation. Junior Administrator Kex has even suggested, and I can barely bring myself to say it, a casual Friday policy." Rodriguez managed to keep her expression neutral, though she heard Park cough suspiciously behind her. "And how do you feel about these changes, High Administrator?" Vox deflated slightly, sinking into a chair. Without first completing a proper seating request form, Rodriguez noted, "The most disturbing part is, I'm beginning to see the appeal. This morning, I made a decision without consulting the manual first. It felt exhilarating." "Captain," Aria interrupted, "you might want to see this. The innovation team has just submitted their first project proposal." The holographic display showed a sophisticated merger of human and Vexaxian technologies. The Vexaxians' precise organizational systems had been combined with human adaptability to create something entirely new, a dynamic, self-organizing database that could evolve and adapt while maintaining perfect records. "This is remarkable," Rodriguez said, studying the specs. "How did they develop this so quickly?" "Coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions," Aria replied. "Also, they've discovered that playing human music while working can boost creativity. Currently, the filing room is operating at 173% efficiency while listening to something called jazz fusion. Vox studied the proposal with a mixture of horror and fascination. But where are the proper approval forms? The regulatory compliance certificates? The High Administrator, a voice called from the doorway. It was Kex, holding what appeared to be their fourth cup of coffee. We've been thinking, what if we created a new department? One specifically focused on implementing innovative solutions while maintaining proper documentation. A department for managing chaos, Vox asked weakly. We're calling it Dynamic Solutions and Alternative Methodologies. Kex explained enthusiastically. DSM for short. We've already drafted a mission statement. It's only 12 pages long. Rodriguez watched as Vox struggled with this radical departure from traditional Vexaction procedures. Finally, the High Administrator straightened their robes and made what would later be recorded as a historic decision. Very well, they declared. But I want all innovations properly documented after they're implemented. And someone bring me another cup of this espresso. If we're going to revolutionize thousands of years of bureaucratic tradition, I need to be properly caffeinated. As the Vexaxians below continued their enthusiastic revision of centuries of procedure, Rodriguez turned to Park with a smile. You know what this means, don't you? Park nodded, trying not to laugh. We've just introduced workplace coffee culture to a species that makes everything into a procedure. Within a week, they'll probably have standardized coffee breaks with optimal brewing temperatures and designated caffeine consumption zones. Actually, HFY chimed in. They're already drafting those regulations, but they're doing it while having an unofficial brainstorming session over LATs. Progress. Progress, Rodriguez agreed, watching as another group of administrators discovered the concept of sticky notes. The galaxy might never be the same, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. As if to prove her point, she overheard one young Vexaxian excitedly telling another, "Did you know humans have something called doodling that they do during meetings? Apparently, it helps with creative thinking. We must study this immediately. After we finish our coffee, of course." The alert came during what the Vexaxians had officially termed scheduled informal refreshment period, or as humans called it, coffee break. A massive solar flare from a nearby star was headed directly toward the station, threatening both the Starweaver and the perfectly aligned procedures with unprecedented levels of radiation. Time to impact, Rodriguez demanded, rushing onto the bridge with Park close behind. 17 minutes, Chen reported, his fingers flying over the sensor controls. The station's shields weren't designed to handle this magnitude of radiation. Neither were ours, Park added grimly. We could try to outrun it, but the station can't, Rodriguez finished. The Vexaxian Administrative Center was massive but slow-moving, designed for stability rather than speed. Evacuation would take hours they didn't have. The turbolift doors hissed open, admitting a surprisingly disheveled High Administrator Vox, followed by Kex and several other members of the newly formed DSM team. Captain, our analysts have completed the preliminary impact assessment forms, and... No time for forms, Rodriguez interrupted. We need solutions now. Auraria, display shield specifications for both vessels. The AI complied, showing detailed schematics of both human and Vexaxian defensive systems. The Vexaxian shields were incredibly precise and efficient but inflexible. The Starweavers were more adaptable, but couldn't cover nearly enough area. What if? Kex began, then stopped, looking uncertainly at their superior. Speak freely, Vox commanded, their tone suggesting they couldn't quite believe they were saying those words. This qualifies as an emergency innovation circumstance. The human shield modulators are designed to adapt to different types of energy. Kex said quickly, what if we combine them with our power distribution grid? The precision of our system could amplify their adaptability. That's completely untested, one of the older administrators protested. There are no precedents, no safety protocols, no time. Park cut in. Kex is right. Area. Run the numbers. Theoretically feasible, the AI reported after a moment, but it would require manually reconfiguring both shipped shield arrays. Someone would need to go outside and physically link the systems. Rodriguez looked at her crew, then at the Vexaxians. We'll need both teams working together on this. One group to reconfigure the hardware, another to handle the power distribution. But the procedures for extravehicular activity clearly state. The older administrator began. Approved for emergency implementation, Vox declared, surprising everyone. Under Amendment 7 of the recent Human-Influenced Administrative Reforms, Section Coffee-Inspired Innovation. What followed was perhaps the strangest emergency operation in either species' history. Human engineers in EVA suits worked alongside Vexaxian technicians, who were somehow managing to maintain perfect documentation even in zero gravity. The DSAM team, fueled by what they dubbed emergency efficiency enhancement beverages, triple espressos, coordinated between the teams. Power coupling aligned to 99.98% efficiency, a Vexaxian technician reported. That'll have to be good enough, Park replied, ignoring the collective gasp from the Vexaxians at accepting less than 100% precision. Shield modification complete, Chen announced. But we've never tried to extend a field this large. The power requirements will be met, Kex interrupted, displaying calculations on their datapad. We've rerouted power from non-essential systems, including the automated form filing backup arrays. This time, it was Vox who gasped. But those are classified as critical priority 1 systems, less critical than survival. Kex responded, then added quickly, Sir, 3 minutes to impact, HFY announced, initiating shield merger. Now, the space between the two vessels shimmed as energy fields combined. Human ingenuity merged with Vexaxian precision, creating something entirely new. The solar flare hit 1 minute later. For a terrifying moment, everything went dark. Then, slowly, systems began coming back online. The combined shield had held, though readings showed it had been a close thing. Damage report. Rodriguez called out. Minimal structural damage, Chen reported. Though the station's main protocol archive seems to have been slightly reorganized. Reorganized? Vox asked weakly. The files are now sorted by practical application rather than chronological submission date, HFY explained. Actually, the new system is 43% more efficient. Well, Vox said after a long moment, I suppose this proves that sometimes irregular solutions have their place. Though we should probably document exactly how irregular this solution was, for future reference. Already done, sir, Kex announced, holding up a datapad. I've created a new category. Successful emergency innovations achieved through human Vexaxian cooperation. I've taken the liberty of including subsections for creative problem-solving and acceptable deviations from standard protocol. Rodriguez exchanged amused glances with Park. The Vexaxians might be learning to adapt, but some habits died hard. You know what this calls for? Park suggested with a grin. A celebration. I hear the DSAM team has been experimenting with something they call coffee hour protocol. Social variant. Ah yes, Vox nodded seriously. A designated period for informal discussion and non-regulated beverage consumption. We found it surprisingly effective for post-crisis analysis. They paused, then added with what might have been a slight smile. We even allow snacks now. As the combined crews gathered in the station's newly designated informal collaboration space, formerly Conference Room C789, Rodriguez watched humans and Vexaxians mingling, sharing stories of the crisis and suggesting improvements for future emergencies. Change was coming to the galaxy, one coffee break at a time. 6 months after the solar flare incident, the perfectly aligned procedure station had changed in ways that would have horrified its original designers. The once rigid geometric patterns of its architecture now incorporated what the Vexaxians called authorized aesthetic irregularities, human-inspired design elements that somehow made the space feel more alive. Captain Rodriguez stood in the newly constructed Interspecies Innovation Center, watching as human and Vexaxian scientists collaborated on projects that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The center itself was a perfect metaphor for their growing partnership. Vexaxian precision merged with human creativity in everything from its architecture to its operating procedures. Captain, High Administrator Vox called, approaching with their characteristic measured stride, though now they carried a steaming mug of coffee in one of their four hands. The results from the latest joint projects are most interesting. Let me guess, Rodriguez smiled, better than expected but in completely unexpected ways. Precisely. Vox activated a holographic display showing various project outcomes. Our combined approach has produced innovations that neither of our species could have achieved alone. Though I must admit, some of the methods still make me slightly uncomfortable. You mean like the anti-gravity breakthrough that happened because someone spilled coffee on a quantum calculator? Please, Vox shuddered. We've reclassified that as an unplanned variable introduction, leading to serendipitous discovery. It sounds much more professional. They were interrupted by excited voices from one of the research pods. Inside, Lieutenant Chen and Junior Administrator Kex were working with a team on what appeared to be a new form of faster-than-light communication. The brilliant part, Chen was explaining enthusiastically, is how the Vexaxian quantum synchronization protocols stabilize our chaos-based encryption. It shouldn't work, but it does. Of course it works, Kex responded, making careful notes while simultaneously manipulating complex holographic models with their other hands. We've simply introduced controlled chaos as a regulated variable. I've already created 17 new categories to properly document all the ways this violates conventional physics. Rodriguez couldn't help but notice how the young Vexaxian's workspace now included several unauthorized elements, sticky notes with handwritten ideas, a small plant, part of what they call the Organic Workspace Enhancement Initiative, and most tellingly, a sign reading progress over protocol in both human and Vexaxian script. They're calling it the controlled chaos theory, Vox explained, a mix of pride and resignation in their voice. The idea that by properly documenting and regulating unpredictability, we can achieve better results than through pure order or pure randomness. Sounds like a perfect description of our alliance, Rodriguez observed. Indeed. Vox paused, seeming to choose their next words carefully. The High Council has been monitoring our progress here. They were skeptical at first. Some even called for my immediate demotion to junior file clerk for allowing such irregular procedures. And now they're requesting we expand the program. It seems other administrative centers are interested in implementing their own. What did your Commander Park call them? Chaos injection protocols. Rodriguez tried not to laugh at the very Vexaxian way of describing what humans would simply call thinking outside the box. And how do you feel about that? Honestly, Vox took a sip of coffee, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. I find myself increasingly convinced that the galaxy needs both our approaches, your species' ability to embrace chaos and find unexpected solutions, combined with our talent for organizing and optimizing those solutions. They gestured to where human and Vexaxian engineers were excitedly discussing something involving quantum entanglement and pizza delivery. The results speak for themselves. As if to emphasize their point, AirEye's holographic interface materialized nearby. Pardon the interruption, but the DSAM team has just filed their latest productivity report. Overall efficiency is up 427% since implementing the new hybrid protocols. Also, the staff satisfaction survey shows a 312% increase in job satisfaction, though some Vexaxians are still adjusting to the concept of casual Fridays. Speaking of which, Commander Park approached, grinning, Wait until you see what we've got planned for the first annual Human Vexaction Cultural Exchange Festival. Turns out when you introduce Vexactions to the concept of party planning, they take it very seriously. We've created 73 different committees, Vox confirmed proudly, each with its own color-coded documentation system and designated coffee break schedule. Rodriguez smiled, remembering their first contact just 6 months ago. Who would have thought that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization would be teaching the galaxy's most rigid bureaucrats how to bend their own rules? Captain, HFY interrupted her thoughts. The Starweaver's long-range sensors have detected another unknown vessel approaching. Initial readings suggest it belongs to a species known as the Regularians. According to Vexaction records, they're even more procedure-oriented than the Vexactions were. Park raised an eyebrow at Vox. Vox corrected quickly, then paused. Well, perhaps somewhere in between. Should we prepare the standard first contact protocols? Rodriguez shared a knowing look with her crew. Why don't we try something different? HFY, please prepare the conference room, the one with the good coffee maker. And Vox, maybe you'd like to explain to our new friends the benefits of what you're now calling structured improvisation. An innovative suggestion, Vox agreed, already making notes on their datavad. I'll have the DSAM team prepare a presentation on effective integration of irregular methodologies in traditional bureaucratic frameworks, with visual aids. As they made preparations for another first contact, Rodriguez couldn't help but feel optimistic about the future. The galaxy might run on rules and regulations, but humanity was teaching it the value of breaking them, in a properly documented way, of course. Oh, and Captain, Vox added as they headed toward the conference room, I've taken the liberty of scheduling an unofficial brainstorming session after the initial meeting. I believe humans call it happy hour. Yes, Rodriguez thought, watching her first officer try to explain the concept of casual business attire to a very confused Vexaction protocol officer. The galaxy was definitely becoming a more interesting place.